Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got a great show for you today. I know things probably look a little bit strange. We've had some technical difficulties with our usual studio. There was a flood, I believe a plague of locusts. Once we have the engineer and the exorcist get out here, we'll be back in our usual digs. But for now, we're making it work. Lovely to sort of see you, Nomiki.
I mean, it is Washington, it is the swamp, and there's a lot happening existentially with this country. But do want to throw out Happy Indigenous Peoples Day, too, because it is a holiday in this country, so.
And happy Columbus Day because of my Italian ancestry.
Although, did you see the news about Columbus?
I've heard they're trying to cancel a hero to my people. So
well, he could be an Italian Jew. They're saying that he has Jewish lineage. So, you know, Rome has a long history of that, ancient Rome. Just adds more fascination to the mystery of who our founding people were.
Fascinating. Well, let's get into our top news story. Just 3 weeks out from Election Day, and former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris are locked in a dead heat. Harris and Trump each getting 48% support from registered voters in the latest NBC News poll. Now, key findings from the survey show three things. Harris's popularity is declining after her summertime boost. There's a massive gender gap between support for Trump and for Harris, and abortion is a top motivating issue. Now, CNN contributor Scott Jennings spelled out the gender gap issue for his fellow panelists. Let's watch.
And this gender gap issue is real. It's a real problem, and you see the Democrats reacting to it. And I think what they are now finally in October, the election, coming to realize is that a lot of men think Democrats care more about dudes who want to become women than dudes who just want to be dudes.
Well,
and no hunting, cosplay, or cringy videos is going to change it. The bet is made. Working class men, whether you're black, Hispanic, or white, persistently, consistently do not believe the Democratic Party, and specifically Kamala Harris, are going to do a thing for them. They've been told that they're the problem, and I suspect they're going to rise up on Election Day and tell the elites who told them that you're wrong.
A New York Times Siena poll shows Harris's support among Hispanic voters is, quote, in dangerously low territory for Democrats, while Trump has managed to tighten his grip on this crucial demographic. The poll found Harris vulnerable with the voter bloc when it comes to the economy, migration, and crime. Politico says part of the problem for Harris is that Trump, the Trump effect, 56% of Americans now favor deporting all undocumented immigrants, up to 20 points from 8 years ago. Trump is expected to appear at a Univision town hall on Wednesday.
When Harris spoke at Univision last week, she took time to tout her endorsement by Bush's Attorney General, Alberto Gonzales. Reacting on Threads, influencer Yashar Ali wrote, quote, I am immersed in Republican culture. I speak to tons of conservatives from far right to MAGA to Bush-style conservatives. None of them would be moved by who Alberto Gonzales or Dick Cheney are endorsing. It's what some liberals think matters because they don't understand Republican culture and media these days. It's a cut and paste approach. And in other bad news for Harris, Democrats' voter registration advantage has dropped in three key battleground states, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Nevada. Experts blame a lack of enthusiasm for the Democratic Party.
Meanwhile, in a puzzling move, Trump has spent a lot of time campaigning recently in several deep blue states. On Friday, he was in Colorado. He announced a rally in New York City before the end of the month. And he was in California on Saturday, where, by the way, a possible third assassination attempt on Trump was thwarted. It all happened after a local cop arrested an armed man outside Trump's rally. The 49-year-old man was caught at a police checkpoint, allegedly trying to enter the rally with a fake press pass. Cops noticed his car was unregistered and then searched the car, where they found fake IDs, a shotgun, a loaded handgun, and a high-capacity magazine, per officials.
Now, the suspect has been identified as Vem Miller. He was released on a $5,000 bail. He describes himself as a huge Trump supporter, and he said he always travels with his guns. Now, according to Fox News, the Trump campaign does not view this as an actual assassination attempt. So let's start right there, and then maybe we'll circle back to the polling. So I understand why tensions are high. There were 2 assassination attempts on Trump's life. One successfully shot at him, wounded him, killed another person, injured others. So we're all on very high alert. In this case, while details are very early, this suspect has been identified. He was taken into custody and released on bail. He describes himself very vividly, and he's given interviews. His views are very pro-Trump, are conservative-leaning. He says he travels with guns because he gets death threats. He disputed that he had fake IDs or that he wasn't allowed to be there, that kind of thing. That will be sorted out. It doesn't sound like he was there. No one has made a case that he was actually there to harm Trump, and the Trump campaign also doesn't view it that way. So we should probably not actually put this one in the category of assassination attempt, although I'm very glad authorities took swift action, that this looked shady, it looked suspicious, and they actually did something about it is A+ job.
I was thinking about when I was covering Trump rallies in 2015 and 2016 and other events like QAnon events in Arizona, and how many people were carrying guns. Many of these states, there's open carry states, not all of them, of course. And it is a question. I mean, if you're in this politically charged environment, you don't really know what everybody's intention is. And I think that's something the authorities are going to be looking into with him, is what really was his intent? Were there any manifestos like previous assassination attempts? And let's not forget, the last two did have conservative backgrounds, former Trump supporters that turned and focused on Ukraine, the first assassination attempt. And then the second one was a conservative. The problem is it's clearly mental health. We understand that people are being radicalized and can go down rabbit holes and may have different intentions, whether it's to assassinate a president, to get their own attention, or just there's some sort of strange conspiracy theory that's leading them there. We're going to find out more. Obviously, the fake IDs are bizarre. The fact that the car wasn't registered, also bizarre. Who doesn't register their car? And is that part of some bigger story here? And we'll learn over time.
Yeah, lots of people, don't certainly you should. And if you're, violating the law by not having registration or having guns you're not supposed to possess, I am, fully on board with prosecuting people in those cases. We don't even know that this guy is necessarily mentally ill in the same way that certainly the first shooter was absolutely mentally ill. This guy's not even a shooter, right? He says he's never fired these guns. He just happens to own them for his self-protection. Again, I'm not saying that excuses him or makes him innocent of some crime here. I just don't. There's no reason even at this point to think he is necessarily some unstable gunman, just that he had the guns. But
the IDs are what I'm alarmed by, is the fake IDs. Of course, it's legal to carry guns, and as I said, at many rallies, people were carrying them. Made me feel a little uncomfortable when they were yelling at me as the media, but especially in this politically charged environment. This is actually the issue, though, as we're going to talk more about polls, is there are these divides over some serious cultural issues in that, do Democrats and progressives deeply understand what conservatives are feeling, and even the conservatives that may not be voting for Trump, and how do you sway over those folks on the Harris side?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what's at bay here, is the Harris campaign right now is trying to navigate this group of voters that are conservative-leaning, anti-Trump, and some men, even if it's just a few percentage of the men, to get them off the couch to support Harris, and getting into their psyche is very difficult. They probably have to hire some sort of psychologist to analyze. I hope they are, because it seems like they're not penetrating, and they need to get them off the couch because there are major culture divides in this country, and there's a portion of the population that really doesn't speak. They're not being spoken to maybe the way that they traditionally were when we had a more traditional two-party system.
I think it's fascinating that we might be ending the era of extreme racial polarization. We're now experiencing racial depolarization, where it's not so automatic that non-white people are Democrats. Trump Republicans are doing better with black males, Latino males. We're experiencing, as you said, increased gender, sex-based polarization and education status. If you go back 15 years, there's no difference in education. Income is a little bit more complicated, but education particularly, in who's voting for who party. And now it's the elites, the better educated, the wealthier, voting for Democrats. And this is Kamala Harris is only doing so well. She certainly improved on where Biden was standing, and when she initially became the new candidate, there was a lot of enthusiasm. I would argue some of it was a little vibes-based and to some degree manufactured by the media, and I think that has been borne out because now she's come down a little bit, despite having, what everyone described as myself included, as a good debate performance against Trump, hasn't ended up solidifying any kind of advantage. She's doing better than Biden. I think that, goes to show that she's not a particularly tested commodity. She was sprung on the American people. She was substituted at the last minute. And she's doing, again, better than Biden, well by some metrics, but the polls have it neck and neck. And again, this goes to the fundamental question. I say this all the time. This is the only question that matters. Are the polls exactly accurate this time, in which case Kamala can rest assured she's probably going to win? Or are they off by even a little bit?
They're always
remembering
off by a little bit.
that they were off massively in Democrats' favor 4 years ago.
Well,
if that is the
also
case again, Trump is going to win in a landslide.
Well, that's also because, let's keep in mind, and this is what's, I think, very difficult for both campaigns to assess, is 2020 was a record turnout year because of those mail-in votes, because we were dealing with a pandemic. There were far more votes than ever in history, and in 2016 there were more votes than ever in history, for both sides, by the way. So, it's really hard to assess what turnout's going to be like this election since we don't have a pandemic, since there isn't mandatory mail-in votes in many states the way that there were a few years ago. But simultaneously, the gender divide is really what this is about. I think that the conversation about white working class males is a little outdated based on 2016. We've had a pandemic. A lot of folks have unfortunately passed away because of COVID and also just aging out, those older voters. She is doing significantly better with young women, more so than ever in history. And he is doing better, not significantly better, better with some younger men than previous elections, Republicans have done. And it's not just a class thing. I mean, you have educated young men and educated women who are voting in different directions. Because somebody's educated doesn't mean that they're better off or they're elite. They could have gone to a state school. They could be saddled with debt, as most young people are that have gone to, even if they went to a 2-year college or went for 1 year to school. We have a crisis with student loan debt in this country, and credit card debt has gone up to record rate levels because of previous years of inflation due to the pandemic. So, the way that we define working class nowadays is broken, in my opinion. I think there are plenty of educated folks out there who are really struggling to survive, many who live in cities with rising rents, the cost of living being much higher, and delaying having children. It's not our traditional assumption of how we look at economic layouts in politics have been over the years. I think we're really modeling this after 2016, but the country has changed a lot. Even so that people are just used to Trump. I mean, one of the New York Times did an assessment, Nate Silver, and he broke down several of the reasons why the numbers are laying out this way. I just think the unifying thing is that Donald Trump is winning over a few more male voters in each demographic. It's not that he's winning with African Americans. It's not that he's winning with Latinos. He is doing a margin better than previous years, and she is doing a margin worse. But I also think a sneaky factor here is there are going to be women who may not be telling pollsters that they're voting for Kamala Harris, but when they get in that polling booth, they're going to vote for her. And there are going to be men who may be saying that they're going to turn out, and they're not going to turn out because it is statistically and historically harder to turn out men than it is women. Women vote more. They're a larger voting population on top of it. And I really do think that they're going to sway the election. And in 2016, it was about the white women. This year, it's about the white men.
Well, we shall see. Lots more to get into today on Rising. Stay tuned.
Ohio Senator and Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, went after ABC's Martha Raddatz on the Sunday morning show this week. Raddatz slammed Trump's claims that Venezuelan gang Tren De Aragua is taking over Aurora, Colorado. She cited Aurora's Republican mayor, who dispelled the rumors, calling it, quote, grossly exaggerated.
Vance immediately went after Raddatz. Here's their testy exchange. Let's watch.
People are terrified by what has happened with some of these Venezuelan gangs.
Senator Vance, I'm going to stop you because I know exactly what happened.
Martha.
I'm going to stop you. The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs, and Donald Trump is the problem and not Kamala Harris's open border? Americans are so fed up with what's going on, and they have every right to be. And I really find this exchange, Martha, sort of interesting because you seem to be more focused with nitpicking everything that Donald Trump has said rather than acknowledging that apartment complexes in the United States of America are being taken over by violent gangs.
And CBZ Management, a management company that owned that property in Aurora, Colorado, I see has put out a statement on X saying that this is absolutely the situation. There's clear evidence. I'm reading from their statement. Many still deny the reality of the situation, sometimes using us as scapegoats. That's why we're no longer staying silent. Yes, gangs did take control of our apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado, and the government did nothing. That is the real story.
I mean, is it the real story? They issued a statement. I don't know anything about this company, who owns them, what their political leanings are. Listen, things happen in apartment complexes. They happen all over the country. I love how the Trump Vance ticket believes that anecdotes work for them when they're arguing something. For instance, when there are school shootings and the kids illegally get guns from their parents. They're like, oh, well, that's an anecdote. It's not the common situation. You know, most gun owners are law-abiding citizens, which they are, by the way, but they don't want to see these anomalies and investigate them. Now, is there probably some sort of organized crime in some apartment complexes? Sure. Is it something that is taking over our country where Donald Trump thinks we should bring in the National Guard and the military to go after the, quote, enemies from within? I think that they're using this as a tactic to scare people in swing districts who, for the most part, in these swing states and swing districts, specifically in those blue states where they're trying to go after, win a few congressional seats, Republicans, they're trying to gin up the base. They're trying to make them feel like they're living in this scary society when crime is down across the country, and it has been down. There was a slight peak after the pandemic, but we are living in a country that's far safer than it was in the 90s when Donald Trump first started his attacks against people of color, and definitely the 80s and 70s. They just are looking for things to scare people.
Well, yes, crime is coming down from the pandemic highs in a lot of places, which is certainly a good thing. I do think politicians on both sides can exaggerate bad things that are going on. But look, the reality of this situation does seem to be, it looks to me like the media took this one very dismissively, putting it in the same bucket as people eating pets or whatever, where there is an underlying truth to gang activity in this apartment complex that was not taken seriously by the authorities. You can say that's anecdotal, although this seems somewhat well-sourced to me at this point. It is true. I absolutely reject the idea that anecdotes are only wielded in bad faith by Republicans. I mean, think how many abortion-related anecdotes we've had to reckon with from Democrats about how this life-saving procedure can't be performed because this one person couldn't get a doctor to do it because they misread the law, etc. This is something that commonly happens. Look, here's a situation where government did not address a violent gang taking over a apartment complex in America, and that is stunning and unacceptable to a lot of people. And yes, it is causing them to be more interested in the solutions for violent illegal immigration that Republicans and Donald Trump have, which every poll shows they are more trusted to handle this. I agree with you that this kind of describing the country language as all overrun by violent immigrants could certainly be taken too far. But I, too, like J.D. Vance, as soon as Martha Raddatz says, well, but it was only one town, and it's only a couple of buildings. Well, that's a real problem to the people who live there.
It is a problem to the people who live there, and the authorities did go and listen, we have a strong Border Patrol and ICE. They're not sitting on this. They're fully funded. What really gets me about this and why I'm concerned that the Harris campaign is not drilling down on this more, and they've actually sort of abandoned the immigration conversation a bit in states like Arizona because for whatever reason, for the first time in history, it is not being discussed openly in Arizona, where historically every candidate who's run for Senate or Congress brings it up right away on both sides. what concerns me about that is they should really be honing in on how Donald Trump was the one who rejected immigration reform. It was his Congress, it was his Republicans, it was his conservatives who did not want a bipartisan immigration reform. And he does not have a solution. His solution, we should all be pausing today and realizing what he said. His solution was to have the military go after all of his enemies, whether they're the left, or they are the immigrants, any immigrants, and round them up. This is fascistic. This is authoritarian behavior. And you, of course, as a libertarian, I should be concerned, I assume, as well. This is unprecedented. He is literally saying he's going to bring in the National Guard, bring in the military, and suddenly, what, we're Venezuela? If we're so concerned with Venezuela, he sure seems to be mimicking them a bit right now.
I do not recall him saying that he was going to use the military to go after his political enemies. I think he said,
I will read the quote to you right now.
Criminals, the enemy
The radical
within.
left lunatics. I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people. Radical left lunatics, he said on Maria Bartiromo's show. I think it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, National Guard or by the military, because they can't let it happen.
Yeah. There should be no military going after political enemies or opponents. What we are talking about here, what is popular among the American people, it was, in fact, during the summer of rioting, this was treated by the mainstream media as some fringe opinion, but most people agreed, if you looked at public opinion pollings, that the National Guard, if necessary, could be used to stop rioting and looting and that kind of things, which was motivated by leftist criminal justice, anti-police mentality. So I think that's what's being described there. Now, you're right
don't you think
that
they
as
have
a
a right to express
libertarian,
themselves?
I don't want the federal government necessarily to be the ones, the federal troops handling these things. I think a lot of the solutions proposed by the right on immigration and other subjects would be very expensive, and I don't want to create some new Patriot Act style door-to-door surveillance to check if you're an immigrant or not. But there will be public frustration if crime is not being addressed. There is public frustration, and it's not even political. It's whoever the leaders are, whoever the authorities are, they need to do a better job deterring crime, doing something about the disorder we see in our cities. That is something that is something, again, minorities want as well. It's not like some elite white people concern. The people who actually live in these communities are sick of dealing with it. It's people who are on the borders of on the lower end of the economic income distribution who are most concerned about this because they're living through it, and more has to be done. Now, that doesn't mean some military run by Trump kind of thing. I would not be in support of that. I'm not a Trump supporter, frankly, because he had 4 years to address a lot of the problems with federal overreach, and he failed to do it. But this is why people still like him and why he very well might be the next president of the United States.
He's playing strongman. It's classic dictatorship, authoritarian playbook. We know, as you mentioned earlier, that crime is down. We both live in cities. We've seen how it's gone down. And it's definitely not what it was in the 80s and 90s when we really were dealing with a very difficult situation. I think that's what the Harris campaign really needs to hone in on, is countering the message, because right now Donald Trump is dominating the message and he just keeps going further and further. To what point? I mean, they've talked about challenging the election. It's now a Republican stance that they're going to challenge the election no matter what. That is classic authoritarian behavior. And it is deeply concerning to me that this kind of rhetoric is being used to really push fear to its highest levels in this country, where no matter where we go in this election, you're going to see post-Trump, post-Harris, whoever it is, you're going to see a country at war with each other because they've been pushed fear through this extremist behavior, rhetoric on both sides.
Yeah, I just don't think it's. I don't think it's just the rhetoric. I do agree with you that some of the rhetoric on both sides, some of the rhetoric from J.D. Vance and Donald Trump is very heated. We don't hear as much, frankly, from Kamala Harris or Tim Walz as we do from J.D. Vance, because he's the only one of the four who consistently does tons of media interviews. And I certainly disagree with the way he characterizes some of the problems in America, but we're arguing about the size of the problems. It persuades no one. It doesn't help to pretend that the problems don't exist at all, which is, I think, frequently what we hear from our media class. But we got to leave it there. More Rising to come. Stay tuned. Some big Elon Musk news over the weekend. This was epic. So SpaceX caught a towering booster rocket back at its launch pad in South Texas, which is marking a major engineering milestone for the Starship. It was SpaceX's first attempt at the catch. The vehicle could one day be used to carry humans to Mars and to the moon. Musk said on X, quote, "Big step towards making life multiplanetary was made today." And NASA Administrator Bill Nelson congratulated the company in an X, writing, quote, "Congratulations to SpaceX on its successful booster catch and its 5th Starship flight test today as we prepare to go back to the moon under Project Artemis. Continued testing will prepare us for the bold mission that lies ahead." Now, while the Daily Wire's Ben Shapiro said, quote, "Elon Musk is currently engineering an epical revolution in technology, and California is busy trying to stop him because he did memes they don't like."
Meanwhile, Democratic Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman warned Democrats about Musk's appeal. Let's watch.
People assumed after 2012 that Pennsylvania is an easy layup, for Dems, and I'm like, no, that's just not true. And Trump has now made it so competitive, and I want people to understand how popular he is in Pennsylvania. And one thing, honestly, that it really does have me concerned more than the polls. The polls is what I expected, but now he is using, and Musk is willing to actually show up at these kinds of rallies. And I witnessed that in Butler County a couple days ago. Musk is, most endorsements don't count for much in this business, but Musk is incredibly popular, and he has an appeal to a demographic that Democrats have been struggle with. And to some people, that they see him as, that's Tony Stark. He's the world's richest man, and he's undeniably a brilliant guy. So I think that is a situation for Democrats we would have to acknowledge.
Yeah, I think Fetterman often has some very interesting and perceptive things to say about the state of the Democratic Party, pointing out Musk's appeal as an engineer, as a businessman, likening him to Tony Stark, which I actually think is ironic because John Fetterman himself bears a little bit of a resemblance to the villain from the first Iron Man movie, the Obadiah Stane, who's played by, I can't think of his name, Jeff Bridges. Doesn't he look a little bit like Jeff Bridges?
I mean, when Jeff Bridges in character, sure.
Yeah.
I think that what Fetterman is saying is he's appealing to young white men who spend a lot of time online, who dream about being billionaires someday. And that was, I think, part of the appeal of Donald Trump in 2015.
Going to space? Don't we all dream about going to space?
No, I think that's a real male. I mean, I love science. I think science is great. And obviously, the queens of NASA were Black women who really helped our space program get off the ground. That's not the narrative, of course, Elon Musk. Elon Musk is putting a lot of money into funding scientists, and I think that's great. That's fantastic. I wish he would pay his taxes so we could fully fund NASA, but he's also doing things that are detrimental, which I don't want to leave off the table here. He has received fines because they have violated the Clean Water Act in Texas, that they are ignoring the regulations in terms of dumping hundreds of thousands of chemicals into the ground that they are supposed to they're supposed to use a process to basically a clean hydration process so that the water that is dumped is not toxic, but is actually, contributes to the environment. And it's obviously affecting not just turtles and animals, but it's affecting vegetation. It's affecting drinking water. It really is quite impactful to the community. And, he just does things. He skirts the law. You see it with Twitter. He's using Twitter or X. He's using it as a political weapon the way that he said others were doing. Jack Dorsey, who helped him get that position, by the way, helped him take over the board and do a hostile takeover of the company. Jack Dorsey's company, which he was opposed to how it was being run, as a political weapon, is now way more of a political weapon. He's lost 80% of the valuation. Folks are jumping off Twitter, and it's basically just incel land at this point. So if Fetterman sees a certain demographic, we're talking about a margin of young white men, some men of color, some much smaller, that he's appealing to. But that could sway an election in a place like Pennsylvania. And I'm going to add one more thing. I was in Pennsylvania last week for an event in Lancaster. And it was a live event, and there were some young men in the audience afterwards who came up and asked me specifically about why I had these feelings about Elon Musk. They could not understand what was wrong with Elon Musk, and I had to go on my diatribe about Elon Musk. I don't think I swayed them, but it is important to counter the narrative Elon Musk.
I have been, I will be frank with you, taken aback at the level of anger he inspires from so many on the liberal and Democratic side. And I gotta say, I agree with Fetterman. I don't think it's always a good idea. Look, I don't agree with everything he does or certainly says on X, and I'm personally worried that X is too much of a distraction for him because the better use of his time is making us a multi-planetary species. He just shot a rocket into the sky and then caught it. That's amazing. And to be fair, that's not all him. He has a team of brilliant engineers. He's responsible for running the company, but it takes, I'm not crediting it like a Tony Stark where it's just all him. Obviously, there's a lot of people behind him who are doing great work. Great, important, wonderful work. You talk about the environmental impact. I mean, they're always going to say there's environmental impact, so we can't do anything. So we can't build anything in this country. That's why we lost all our manufacturing. That's why we got to get all our microchips from across the Pacific Ocean, because we can't do anything in this country because of red tape and often fraudulent and exaggerated environmental concerns. We are going to the moon. We are going to the Mars. We're going to do it because Elon Musk, he's going to rescue those astronauts that the other people couldn't get. This is a great thing. And you can fight about his commentary on X. I think that's the least important thing he has to do. Although I will point out that no one on the Democratic side complained. I remember hearing from them when Zuckerberg and Facebook explicitly trying to elect Democrats, and before that, like, well, this is a private company. They can do whatever they want.
I
agreed with that. I defended that to Republicans. Now, X, still a private company run by Elon Musk, working. It's a conservative media organization, now one that does allow free speech and dissent, and you can say whatever you want on it for the most part, and that's the way it is.
I'm worried what he's going to do with these rockets. He wants to send folks to space. Who are the people he wants to send to space? Does he want to leave the others here, or does he want to take the others and send them to space? I'm really concerned about the intent. Also, think about it from the lens of old Cold War era. The Russians, I'm sure, are loving the fact that there's a private company challenging NASA as the Republicans are trying to pull funding from NASA. That's like old world. I don't agree with it. I think it's silly, but it is an old Cold War fight. Say that 10 times fast.
Private industry succeeds where government fails. This is a story as old as time. Government is
being starved,
fraudulent, and wasteful and bureaucratic, and because of market incentives, fails to properly spend money where it should be spent, and the market innovates. And
Elon Musk's companies are financially screwed up at this point, and I don't think he's a better leader, especially X. But plenty of problems at Tesla. I don't trust one man over government. I don't trust the Republicans who keep starving government of resources. Is there some fraudulent stuff? Absolutely, and that should be taken care of. That's why we have government oversight agencies that also need to be funded. Government
oversight agencies getting in the way of my Martian colony. We'll be back with more Rising right after this. House Speaker Mike Johnson took to the airwaves this weekend to sound the alarm over cheating in this year's presidential election. He told CBS News' Margaret Brennan that he's worried about non-citizen voters tipping the election.
You've had really great work done in most of the states to shore up their systems and to make sure that we have a free and fair election. Now, look, as President Trump says all the time, and I agree, our side, what we say at the rallies, you've heard, is we've got to make it too big to rig. I think that's really important. I think there is going to be some cheating in this election. I think non-citizens are going to vote. Look, case in point.
You know that it is against the law for non-citizens to vote in federal elections. That's established law.
Of course it is. Of course it is. But here's the problem. There's a number of states that are not requiring proof of citizenship when illegals or non-citizens register to vote.
I'm so sick of this argument. The conservatives in this country have been saying this for over 100 years. We have had conservatives using this rhetoric against the Irish, against the Polish, against the Italians, against the Greeks, against the Jews. We know Brennan Center has said 0.0000, I want to get the right number of zeros, this is 0.00001% of invalid voters because somebody's registration usually had to do with the green card, by the way, was improperly registered, have had illegal voting. Over the last 25 years, there have been fewer than 1,700 incidents, mostly due to registration errors because of green cards. This is insane that he is allowed to get away with this as the Speaker of the House, and that the Republicans are fine with it while they're simultaneously trying to win over Latinos, many of whom come from families who've immigrated in the last generation. I don't understand the rhetoric, how it's just the old authoritarian playbook. The enemy is the other, it's not us.
Well, I don't know if it's authoritarian to say that only citizens should be voting, but I agree with you that there is not, no one has put forth evidence of widespread improper voting by illegal immigrants. Now, obviously, the voting procedures were very different last time because of the pandemic, with the increasing prevalence of mail-in ballots. Pennsylvania, unfortunately, we had to wait a long time to find out whether the most important state had counted everything correctly. The bigger problem, so I disagree with Republicans that, some vast wave of illegal immigrants voting for Democrats. I mean, again, this is a demographic, funny enough, the Latino men, the Republicans are suddenly doing much better with, so it's not even clear that if they were voting illegally, they'd be voting illegally, to vote for Kamala Harris. So it's a little bit confused. But where there is an impact in terms of the illegal immigrant population is just that, population size, right? You have illegal migrants are disproportionately concentrated in blue states where they do count. They raise the population. They thus increase the overall share of the electoral college vote from places like California, New York, Illinois, also Texas, where that would be then benefiting, yes, Nevada? In some states it benefits the Republicans, but overall it benefits the Democrats more because of California, New York, Illinois.
I actually don't think that math is right. I think they kind of balance each other out.
I've looked at it. It's not so one-sided, but it does on net benefit Democrats.
Are we just talking about, immigrant populations? Are we talking about legal immigrant populations? Or are we talking about, and it's hard to know the undocumented, we don't really have a firm number on that for the most part. We know people who have been trying to go through the system, DACA recipients, et cetera, but it's very hard to have a sense of what the accurate numbers are. It's been much more documented in the last, say, 2 or 3 years because we have amped up border response under both administrations. So we do have a sense of the incoming, how many folks are coming over the border, but we don't really have a sense of how many people are undocumented in this country. Maybe through some sorts of taxation. If they're working, they are paying taxes. So we do, in states like Florida and California, one of the reasons why we're pushing for ID laws is because we want to have a better sense of how many people are in this country that are, not technically legal, but might be, want to go through the system. Some folks have, if you're in a good blue state, you might have more assistance from the state and you're protected. So I just think it's interesting that Republicans are so against these voter ID laws when it probably suits them more in some of their arguments.
Against voter ID? Republicans are not against voter ID
laws. Excuse me, voter ID laws. I mean ID laws, excuse me. Like the license laws, New York is having the ID laws that they're pushing for undocumented people. It's for many different reasons, but you'd think that was something Republicans would want, and they're not. They're the ones pushing against it.
Sure, I think for voting, I think it's fine that people got to be registered, that there's going to be ID checks for voting. It doesn't seem like the biggest burden to me. Again, this is not my singular issue by any stretch of the imagination, because I don't think it ultimately matters very much. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask people to show a license to vote. You have to show a license to do all sorts of things, but is it a big issue? No, because again, Republicans have failed to demonstrate widespread evidence of widespread fraudulent voting that, by the way, that would only benefit the Democrats, because there's some fraudulent voting, but some people fraudulently vote for Republicans, some people fraudulently vote for Democrats. I think Republicans have constructed arguments that there's more fraudulent voting or voting of people who are somebody voting on your behalf when you're deceased in Chicago or more, where there's corruption in big cities, that kind of thing. But some of that is just.
Are we going back to the Kennedy conspiracies?
What's the Kennedy conspiracy?
It was dead people were voting.
People, again, it's not a conspiracy theory. The Nixon-Kennedy election, right, did have actually a lot of problems, and there was some legitimate question about mob ties helping out the Kennedys. I don't think I'm saying anything I'm not allowed to say, right? That's a view that some people, mainstream people, hold. If I'm if I'm not mistaken.
But there is something to that. That we have heard these stories years and years and years over the years that, and keep in mind, the mob, as they said, was tied to unions, and unions were mostly people of color in that era. There were, especially when you look at Tammany Hall in New York, Tammany Hall represented immigrants and people of color. And at that time, you had white elites in the conservative party, whether it was Nixon or previous, back in New York, you just had a more conservative Democratic Party, that were fear-mongering. They were saying, these people are taking your jobs, joining unions. These people are not voting legally, even though a lot of them there had become legal, because they were the others. So this does go back to something psychologically that has been pushed on us over generations, and it's just modernized into this new version of fear-mongering. But as you said, there's no truth to it, but there wasn't truth to it really back then either. I mean, maybe a little bit more because it was harder to regulate, but the penalties are so severe that not only could somebody get a fine or be arrested and imprisoned, by the way, but they could be deported. And I think that's the last thing someone who is, not here legally wants to deal with is deportation.
You're not denying that there was there was some corruption among labor and bosses and organized crime, and not even specifically about voting in the presidential election, but in voting for who their leaders are and all that kind of these are my ancestors as much as anyone else's at this point. As I said earlier on the show, I'm descended from Italians who came over in the early part of the 20th century. So it's not racial or maligning just black people or something. This is working class people of all backgrounds involved in labor. There was, some corruption there.
It was folks who were challenging the authority. I have this theory, if you go back to Tammany Hall in New York, they were fighting the elites and they were using tactics that we would all think is corrupt, probably back then too.
Murder?
Tammany Hall wasn't, but at least some of the organized crime was. But simultaneously, you had the elites of northern, uptown New York. And those were the elites who owned the big businesses, who didn't want to have unions, who wanted to oppress people, who wanted to keep wages down. It's just a reformation of the same dynamics. You have working people in this country who are angry at the elites for not giving them higher wages, for supporting, making safe working conditions. It's just evolved with different groups now and different language and also different parties.
All right, we'll be back with more Rising right after this. Foreign policy was supposed to be one of President Joe Biden's strengths, supposed to be an advantage for the Democrats, the Middle East, where he was such an expert. But for the last year, it's been a catastrophe. A wider war is happening. Netanyahu has repeatedly snubbed the U.S., and now, 3 weeks shy of Election Day, the U.S. says it's going to send 100 American troops to Israel. First deployment of U.S. forces there since the October 7th Hamas attack. The Pentagon also announced Sunday that it would be sending an advanced missile defense system known as THAAD, or Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, to help fend off ballistic missiles. Now, this comes after Iran launched nearly 200 missiles at Israel on October 1st, and as tensions continue to grow in the Middle East.
Meanwhile, Hezbollah launched a swarm of drone attacks Sunday on an Israeli military base in the north of Israel. Killing 4 IDF soldiers and wounding nearly 60 others, the Iranian-backed group said the drone attack was in retaliation of an Israeli attack on Beirut on Thursday. This was an unprecedented attack by Hezbollah, which was able to penetrate Israel's Iron Dome. These strikes are the latest as Israel killed Hezbollah's spiritual, political, and military leader, Hassan Nasrallah, last month. When asked why the U.S. is ramping up, President Biden said to defend Israel. Many wonder how this will be perceived by Harris and Trump supporters. So I have a lot of thoughts on this. I mean, sending 100 troops is not a good look, especially right before the election. 100 troops were sent to help operate this defense weapon, meaning as Iran has advanced military technology and ballistic missiles, the ballistic missiles can get through the Iron Dome. So Israel asked for assistance in blocking those, and that's what this is it's like a defense weapon. It's a complicated battery system that the 100 American troops are being sent to operate. I also was thinking, and I'm not obviously sure on this is all private, were those troops sent to help operate so that it's used as defense against Iran, so that Netanyahu does not use it on other enemies, say Hamas? And on top of all that, I mean, we're just entering a new phase now. I mean, we should be focusing on Gaza and ending this conflict, but Biden, I think he's right in that he wants to neutralize this and prevent further war from occurring so that other folks, including Russia, are not assisting. But it's deeply problematic. It would be, I think, problematic for any administration as long as they're acting in the United States' best interests. I don't think it is U.S. foreign policy. I'm not talking about one leader or the other. Bernie Sanders could be president. I think at the end of the day, U.S. is pushed because of agreements that we have to support Israel, just as France, when we had Trump, was supporting American foreign policy, despite being very frustrated by it.
But previous administrations have, at some point, exercised their leverage over Israel and said enough is enough. Biden, Harris seem unwilling to do that. I consider this a very profound escalation of our involvement in Israel's wars with Hezbollah and with Hamas, etc. Let's be very clear. American ground troops, yes, only to operate a defensive system. Okay, that's where it starts, but what's next? Because they keep asking, Netanyahu, the IDF, they keep asking for more and more and more. We are becoming more entangled, more involved with Israel's war in the Middle East, contrary to what the American people want. The American people do not want to be more involved in what's going on in the Middle East. They say that whether Democrat or Republican, they vote clearly for a break from an interventionist foreign policy. We are being dragged into continuous escalation, continuous warfare with terrorist groups. Look, it's one thing if they want, I don't understand the precise economics going on here. If we want to sell, if they want to pay for weapons from us, that's another matter. But from just the kindness of our heart to give them this, to send our own troops to operate them, this is an expense to the American taxpayers. This is part of, we're paying for another country's defense. Why? We have so many problems here domestically. And is this making us safer? Is this making us better off? I don't think the American people feel that way. So I'm frankly baffled by the Biden-Harris administration's desire to just go along with everything Netanyahu wants, despite privately and sometimes in public being very upset with Netanyahu and what they're doing, but refusing to do anything, to exercise any leverage to deter it. It's a fascinating choice. Doesn't seem to me to be a popular necessarily choice. And I don't think it's one Kamala Harris would depart from whatsoever. This might just be, and for all I know, Donald Trump wouldn't either. I have no idea. I wish he would talk more about how he differs from the current administration on foreign policy. But we are being dragged into a wider war that no one wants, yet we seem powerless, or we're acting powerless to stop. We're not powerless to stop it, but we're behaving as if we are powerless to stop it. Let's be very clear about what we're doing. I want to know what the strategy is, what the plan is to contain this, because there is no appetite among our citizens for escalated war in the Middle East, for good reason.
Listen, Netanyahu, who is supported by a very conservative group of extremists who are also frustrated with him, by the way, or have been at least up until recently, in Israel. The Israeli people are not supportive of Netanyahu. That is something that we have to start with. Netanyahu is the problem. If Netanyahu were to leave power, he would be arrested and locked up on corruption because he was charged with corruption. The United States has an agreement with Israel. The United States feels very concerned that the region is being destabilized and that the countries all around Israel are now ready and willing to attack, which they have. But Netanyahu also propped up Hamas because it was to his favor at the time. And now he's using war and escalating conflict to maintain his power. And he's leveraging what he knows he can leverage with the United States, which is continuous support of the war, even if Joe Biden is actively, openly, and privately antagonistic about his strategy. I mean, Biden has put pressure on other countries to no longer support the funding or support with weapons or funding of Israel, because it's something, I guess, is just against U.S. foreign policy, and Congress would obviously probably agree with him on that. Simultaneously, I think we should have stopped this war early on. There should have been a de-escalation. There should have been mounting pressure to no longer fund the weapons that are going into Gaza. And you know what I find fascinating about this is that Netanyahu spent over a year strategizing with the IDF leaders, the military leadership, on how to have extremely targeted attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon. Yet, They have no targeted attacks in Gaza. In Obama Hospital today, a school was bombed with children. They're supposed to have the most advanced weaponry and sophisticated intelligence in the world, and yet Netanyahu claims, well, there was a member of Hamas in that hospital, so we had to obliterate hundreds of people, kill them. These children who don't have arms, who've lost their parents, parents who've lost their children. 1 in 3 people from Gaza right now are displaced at this point. Over 40,000 people have been killed, majority women and children, and they're supposed to have this targeted operation, which seemed to work with Lebanon, but not in Gaza. So, if I were the Biden administration right now, I would be very firmly pushing back. They want to de-escalate, then it has to be targeted. We cannot have a situation in which there is some sort of escalation and Iran gets so mad that they bomb Israel and they hit American troops now. This is a problem that Biden should have faced early, and he did not. And now we're in a situation in which it's going to be very hard to disentangle, because the United States foreign policy is to stabilize the region, because it has an effect on democracy at whole, including at home. Whether Americans are aware of it or not, they still do support Israel, by the way.
The only thing I would quibble with there is the idea that this would be a different situation absent Netanyahu. You're right that he's unpopular even among very people who support the policy. But that's the problem. Israel, as far as I can tell from public opinion polling, really does support the people of Israel. Not necessarily Netanyahu, but they support what's going on in Gaza and elsewhere. So it is more, even if the administration were to be replaced, and I think you could even make a conservative argument or a pro-Israel argument that Netanyahu, having presided over such a profound security failing and having been involved in the propping up of Hamas, is morally culpable for what happened, and obviously there's the criminal issues and all of that. But I don't know that there would be a drastically different policy under a different Israeli leader, given Israeli public opinion. Obviously, we can't know exactly. Got to leave it there. More Rising right after this. This is exciting. A NASA filmmaker claims that evidence of alien life could be revealed in the next month. Professor Simon Holland, who has worked on projects with NASA, National Geographic, and the BBC, said last week the telescopes on Earth have discovered evidence of intelligent alien life. He told the Mirror, quote, "We have found a non-human extraterrestrial intelligence in our galaxy, and people don't know about it." Now, Holland claims that the Oxford astronomers have identified clear evidence of transmissions from another world and could announce the discovery in the next month.
The filmmaker says a contact with Mark Zuckerberg's organization Breakthrough Listen, a privately funded scientific research program aimed to find evidence of civilizations beyond Earth, shared the latest information with him.
This news has seen mixed reactions online, some writing on X. One of them is in the White House, the aliens, I guess. NASA trying to justify their billion-dollar budgets. Amazing, except we know we have life here and we disrespect and destroy it like it's nothing. Those are some negative reactions. My reaction is that, despite me being, our regular viewers know, pretty much a skeptic for all of these we have evidence of aliens stories. This is actually slightly more promising than the reports we're always hearing that, we have alien bodies somewhere, they crash landed and they got collected by the federal government and the federal government has kept this secret, and we always hear this from a person who knows where it is but can't say because of various reasons, even though it would be the most profound, important information ever revealed in all of human history. This, however, is a radio signal originating from Proxima Centauri, which is a star 4.2 light years from Earth. And it's a very low quality signal, apparently, that was received. There could be alternative explanations. That is apparently what's being looked into right now. This Holland character expressed concern that the Chinese would actually be the first to publicize the news because they're also looking into it. That sounds a little bit to me like, what was that show on Netflix? The Three Body Problem. Did you see that one? That was pretty good.
It's always geopolitics at the end of the day. Yeah. I just find it funny that this is happening a month before the election, or a few weeks before the election. We could find out. It could be the October surprise. I mean, are these the voters that we're looking for? The illegals that we're looking for? They're here to disrupt the election. I just want to know if they're Republican or Democrat and what their stance on abortion is. And are they female? Are they male? Are there different genders? So many questions here. It is such a throwback. I went to University of Arizona, and I took astronomy classes, and it was so exciting. If anybody knows Tucson, Arizona, they have a great observatory there, and I love these classes so much because the teachers would get into these fights. These were, experts, right? These were guys who were studying there and are physicists and astrophysicists. And they would have these internal fights over whether or not life existed outside the planetary system, and I loved listening to their theories. I think just statistically, it's probably likely, and it's just not anything that we have a concept of understanding. I think there are other dimensions. I also think that some of the reports that have been released recently, if you dig into them, a lot of it is about sightings, right? Not necessarily life, but extraterrestrial sightings. Could be a flying object that they couldn't identify, an unidentified flying object that an airplane pilot saw, or somebody obviously had witnessed something. But look at Dennis Kucinich. He's a former congressman, right? I know he's a lefty, and some people question some of his theories, but he said that he was abducted. And there have been a few lawmakers around the world who have talked about being abducted. So curious what they want to know about our political system, and maybe they're targeting those who are just more open-minded.
Maybe they're just targeting open-minded people. They're going to have to beam us up then, beam up many of our viewers. Yeah, I'm a big skeptic. Not because I don't believe that the government would keep secrets. I think the government routinely engages in redacting of documents and tries to keep things that ought not to be secret out of habit. And this does take place all the time. I think a lot of the sightings are probably military equipment from other countries, and that's thus the secrecy. There's a lot of reasons to think that maybe aliens aren't visiting us, because if there are aliens out there somewhere, maybe like light speed travel or faster than light speed travel just is not possible. So it's not going to be something we ever experience, right? The Fermi paradox is that if there are aliens, shouldn't they be showing up all the time? Because it's on a long enough scale of history. There should be ones that are much less developed than us, and also ones that are much more developed, and so they should be teleporting here all the time. So the reason that they're not is either that traveling from one planet or star system to another is just like actually impossible, or civilizations die out and have ecological related collapse or warfare or something. But then we should still be encountering like we're going to have pretty advanced AI within our lifetimes, I think. So shouldn't we be encountering the technological remnants, the artificial intelligence, computers type satellite stuff from other civilizations if they're out there? All this suggests to me that they're not out there. Earth is special. We're alone. It's just us.
Maybe they are, there's been theories that they're coming to get water. They've lost their, natural resources, but it's okay. We're taking care of that here. You're not going to find any clean water anymore. You can't find any clean water.
I think, isn't our water getting cleaner over time? Go drink the water 100 years ago. It's probably filled with so much bacteria that we can't even do anything about because we don't have antibiotics.
That's fair, but I think that we should have the right to clean water, and to tie it to the present day, go EPA for saying you're going to get rid of those lead pipes in the next 10 years. And
yeah,
if Donald Trump runs against that,
get rid of the lead pipes. That's fine. Lead pipe is not good. I'm all for that. We don't want lead in our pipes. Lead makes people crazy.
Totally does. We don't need more of that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the reason. Okay.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see if we have any
alien.
I want to circle back to your remark about alternative dimensions. That I think has greater plausibility. Extra-dimensional creatures, rather than, we think of aliens as the little green men or whatever, that they're going to have bodies that are sort of understandable to us, which is probably not quite right. Like they might be in a form that is so literally alien to us that we would have difficulty comprehending them. Like ants don't walk around, crawl around in the ground thinking like, oh, I wonder what like humans look like. They don't have any comprehension of what we are to them, right? It would be like we would be the ants to these beings.
I'm going to throw one more out there. This is a theory I've seen online. Obviously, there's no valid validation behind this, that dinosaurs were the original occupiers of this world, as we know, and then the humans came in as aliens from other planets. Throw that out there. We are aliens.
There's a episode of Rick and Morty, great show, where dinosaurs returned to Earth. They were the caretakers of our planet, and they're always fleeing some awful meteor species. It's always trying to wipe them out. That's a pretty good one. All right, we've talked about this to death. Very silly, but we're on the lookout. If that announcement comes anytime in the future, we will certainly be reporting it. More Rising after this. Members of the Tren De Aragua migrant gang are pulling off armed robberies in Times Square. The gang members are staying at a city-funded Manhattan shelter. Per the New York Post, nearly 24 young migrants, some as young as 11 years old, part of a group that are committing brazen purse snatches and gunpoint heists, targeting locals and also tourists. They're often seen flaunting their weapons on social media. Now, a Detective Bureau assistant chief told the Post that these migrants have managed to evade jail because of their ages and the state's lenient criminal justice laws. The Post says the crew has about 21 members and has been busted for about 50 separate incidents with no one behind bars yet.
But is Tren De Aragua really taking over New York City as Republicans are painting it? Not that I see. Or is this just a way for the GOP to continue the Colorado-based Tren De Aragua story and fuel concerns about immigration? Maybe, instead, what we should be focusing on is the documentary film Separated, which showcases Trump's horrifying role in separating immigrant families at the U.S.-Mexican border. But unfortunately, for American voters, MSNBC acquired the film, and they announced that they would hold off on airing the film until a month after the election on December 7th. Why would MSNBC wait to air such an important film? Independent journalist Oliver Darcy speculates the decision was made by NBC News boss Rebecca Blumenstein, who is still hoping to persuade Trump to participate in a debate. Oh my goodness. I remember when Fox aired a documentary before the election on immigration related to Obama, and he was reporter-in-chief. I mean, he actually was pretty strong on immigration in terms of conservative standards.
Yeah, Separated has nothing specific about Trump. The same policies were in place before and continued long after. The only thing that ended was the outrage from progressives once this became the Biden separation policy rather than the Trump separation policy. In terms of the gangs in New York, again, this is reporting from the New York Post. These are statements from detectives, from police, that there have been a number of criminal incidents involving very young people who are living in a migrant shelter in the city, and there's nothing being done to keep them locked up. I don't think I'm the most tough on crime person in the entire world, but if you've committed 50 different robberies, maybe, then we don't just kind of release you back onto the streets. That is a source of frustration for me and probably most Americans, that nothing is being done to deter that on any level. Isn't this a problem?
There's a couple of things here as a New Yorker who was in Times Square yesterday. No New Yorker hangs out in Times Square, for those of you who ever go to the city. Do not think that Times Square is indicative of what the city culture is. We avoid it at all costs, but sometimes we have to transfer or commute there. It is a heavily policed area. It is policed mostly because of terrorism threats, and of course, Times Square on New Year's Eve is incredibly policed. You don't see that around there. The other thing is the police, the PBA, the Police Benevolent Association, is extremely conservative and very political, and the head of it was investigated by the FBI. There's a lot of problems in terms of when the police make statements and say that we don't have a strong criminal justice system. Just go to Rikers Island and see how many people who are at Rikers Island because they couldn't, pay to get out, and have the situation there of so many deaths and suicides and health complaints. I mean, we have a criminalized system in New York City. Do not believe what the news says, the media says. Eric Adams,
the fake news is the enemy of the people. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, right now it is. Disinformation is the enemy of the people. Politicized media. So, I'm not saying that
news sources saying this. We're just supposed to not believe them.
Well, New York Post doesn't have fact checkers, so I don't believe a lot of what New York Post says. It's very heavily editorialized. The Rupert Murdoch-owned company.
We don't believe the comments from New York Police Department Chief of Detectives Joseph Kenney.
No, I don't, because they have a history
These
of
Tren
making
De
false
Aragua guys
statements.
hide
They
very well in
released them.
plain sight in the migrant community. We aren't looking to grab the food delivery guy, but these guys go so far as to wear Uber Eats clothing, use delivery bags while they're out there committing their crimes. When we do arrest them, they're very eager to talk about the crimes they have committed, but they are unwilling to talk about Tren De Aragua itself.
And you know what? I'm not saying that Tren De Aragua doesn't exist. It exists, and that is something that is fully needs to be dealt with. What I am opposed to is using a statement from a police officer who has the ability to bring that up in court, and guess what? These people were released in court. This isn't like they're just openly released based on some loose laws that we have in New York City. We don't have loose laws in New York City. We've had some evolution in terms of how inmates are released. Bail, cash bail, is a major problem in our city. There are folks who are being arrested for stop and frisk, for jumping a turnstile, and then they end up at Rikers and they can't afford to spend $1,000 out of pocket to get out of Rikers, and they're there for years under inhumane circumstances, and there's a suicide situation at Rikers right now. That's what the cash bails laws were about. They were not about minors, by the way, who were arrested, and the Police Benevolent Association has a politicized plot, which is very open in New York City. They are major funders of the Republican Party. They're major funders of and supporters of Donald Trump, and they are simultaneously using this migrant situation to gin up more support, which Eric Adams, by the way, was a huge supporter of theirs as a former police officer.
I don't think you should go to Rikers for a year for jumping the turnstile, although it should be enforced that you can't do that. This is how you get a tragedy of the commons. If there's no punishment or deterrence whatsoever for breaking minor crimes, eventually you have people getting away with major crimes.
Don't worry, they just killed somebody over jumping a turnstile. The police opened fire on the man, which also could have injured other people. I think that it should be free. Why are we dealing with a paid transportation? It's $2.50.
Well, it should be whatever it is, but it's not free, and you can't.
Come on, we're not in a privatized state. This is
how are we Democrats take the position we're not going to enforce laws against crime, and yet we're somehow going to disarm the entire populace, and we have to have more gun control and all those things. If you're going to have laws, you need to enforce them. Democrats want to criminalize everything, but then do nothing about it. You have to take actual police action. You have to arrest people who break the rules you have. If you come up with more rules, there's no point. There's no point if you're not going to enforce it against, young people, people from lower economic groups, people from minority groups who are disproportionately committing all these crimes. Enforce it or don't make it a law. Fine, say anyone can jump the turnstile if they want. We're not going to have this be a law anymore. It's practically free. We're not going to do anything about it. See if that works out better, fine. But if you're going to have rules, you have to enforce them. And again, you can enforce them too harshly. I don't think we should shoot on sight people who do it, but it seems to me we can lock up in Rikers or wherever else people who repeatedly rob other people at gunpoint and knife point. They should be locked up.
They are locked up, and those are the
repeatedly.
people who are prosecuted. The issue with this is the PBA has a politicized agenda, and they have been investigated. They're being investigated.
It's not
for
politicized. It's just if it's political that people care about crime and want it dealt with.
But that's okay. So this is the interpretation of crime. There's violent crime, which is being prosecuted, and people do, by the way, end up in jail over that. And then there is targeted crime. They've been investigated for targeting black and brown communities over white communities who also smoke just as much pot, if not more.
I don't want to prosecute anyone. I want to make pot legal.
I want to make pot legal. The turnstiles
we agree on that.
Should not be a violent crime. Nobody should be arrested for that. They're mostly kids.
I agree.
And most New Yorkers don't agree with that. It's the PBA, which is basically headquartered in Long Island. These police officers don't even live in New York City. The majority of them live in Long Island, which is conservative Trump supporting. And they want to enforce their interpretation of what New York City should look like, and they politicize it, and they give to Republicans, and they support Donald Trump, and they would rather kill a black kid who jumps a turnstile.
This is a popular agenda that people can, I do not understand this philosophy. It has to be enforced, or there's no point.
Violent crimes are enforced. We should not have violent. We shouldn't be arresting
We have to stop
people.
the public disorder as well.
What's disorder? Most New Yorkers don't care if someone jumps a turnstile. In fact, I've jumped a turnstile before. It's the way it's targeted. Black and brown communities with stop and frisk.
It's not targeted. I would have you subjected to the exact same penalties for that as anyone else.
Being shot. Great. Thank you, Robbie.
Not shot. No, nobody needs to be shot over it.
But the police are out of control in New York City. You know that. They have an agenda. They're being investigated for white supremacy. You know, these are the guys who are enforcing these laws at whatever their interpretation
There were
is.
actual blanket racist policies like stop and frisk that were racist because they were there was without probable cause or reason, they were routinely stopping black people. That I am absolutely against. But it is okay to stop people if you've witnessed them commit a crime like jumping the turnstile. You stop those people, then you see if they have an illegal weapon, and then you prosecute them, and that's how you stop crime. If Democrats are uncomfortable with that, then they should just stop trying. But that's what it takes to actually deter crime, is you have to also enforce on some level the petty stuff. Not enforce it disproportionately, but you will find out that certain populations are responsible for a disproportionate amount of that crime. If you're uncomfortable with that fact, you should give up the whole project of having like a society and laws and governance at all, because it will end up being enforcing it on those populations.
If only we went off after the wealthy the same way.
All right, we gotta go. More Rising right after this. Well, a new campaign ad argues that voting for Vice President Kamala Harris is the manly choice this election. Let's watch.
I'm a man.
I'm a man.
I'm a man, man.
And I'm man enough.
I'm man enough to enjoy a barrel-proof bourbon.
Meat.
Man enough to cook my steak rare.
Man enough to deadlift 500, then braid the out of my daughter's hair.
You think I'm afraid to rebuild a carburetor? I eat carburetors for breakfast. I ain't afraid of bears.
That's what bear hugs are for.
I'll tell you another thing I sure as shit am not afraid of. Women.
I'm not afraid of women.
I'm not afraid of women.
They want to control their bodies? I say go for it.
They want to use IVF to start a family? I'm not afraid of families.
They want to be childless cat ladies?
Have all the cats you want.
Woman wants to be president? Well, I hope she has the guts to look me right in the eye and accept my full-throated endorsement. Because I'm man enough to support women.
Man enough to know what kind of donuts I like.
Man enough to admit I'm lost, even when I refuse to ask for directions. Man enough to not ban young women from reading Little Women. Or one of those pants books that the sisters like. I'm man enough to raw dog a flight. It sucked. Not worth it.
I'm man enough to be emotional in front of my wife.
In front of my kids.
In front of my horse. I'm man enough to tell you that I cry at Love Actually. Good Will Hunting.
West Side Story.
That and Predator.
And I'm sick of so-called men domineering, belittling, and controlling women just so they can feel more powerful. That's not how my mama raised me. I love women. I love women who support their families.
Women who decide not to have families.
Women who take charge.
And I'm man enough to help them win.
Reaction to that ad was extremely negative. The writer Lyman Stone said on X, "Is there anyone who watches this ad and doesn't feel like it was written by a lizard in a skin suit asking ChatGPT, list of manly things?" Christopher Rufo wrote, this ad is amazing because neither poll in the argument captures the spirit of being a real man. It's not about barrel-aged bourbon, deadlifting 500 pounds, nor is it about supporting IVF or voting for Kamala Harris. These are both caricatures. One is a left-wing mistranslation of manosphere masculinity. The other is an attempt to redefine masculinity. In left-wing ideological terms, taken together, they represent a phony simulacrum of the male nature. Podcast host Tim Pool was a bit more succinct. He wrote simply, "It's like Kamala has never met a man before. This Kamala ad is epic cringe." And I should be clear that the ad did not actually originate from the campaign. It looks like it was put together by a former producer for Jimmy Kimmel. It looks like an ad from the campaign and is an ad on her behalf, or maybe it's not, because I don't think anyone is going to be persuaded to be voting for Kamala based on this. I did not care for it either. I agree with the comments I just read. This is like making up almost a stereotype of what a man is and saying that that's compatible with voting for Kamala Harris, but it's actually just engaging in stereotype, no?
Yeah, the best ads get into the psyche of somebody and hopefully sway them when they're not even aware they're being swayed. The other thing about this ad is going viral, so now more people are seeing it, and maybe, just maybe, it does sway a few voters, because that's all that matters here. I mean, we're talking about the smallest margins, and if it means seeing more men support Kamala Harris, and there are plenty of whiskey drinkers, and I saw some people who did find this ad good. I personally wouldn't have shot it this way, but that doesn't mean it's not effective with the voters that they're looking for. Tim Pool is going to do what Tim Pool is going to do. I don't see Tim Pool as this version of masculinity. I mean, there's also what women think is masculine, and there's what men think is masculine in these spaces. And I think if anybody understands what masculinity is, Kamala Harris understands what masculinity is. I mean, as a woman in the world she's a heterosexual woman. No, but it's true. You know, there is this version where like men are like, you gotta do this, because there's nothing more heterosexual. We're talking about heterosexual men. There's nothing more heterosexual than wanting to win women over to get with them, right? And sometimes you have men who think like, oh, I just got to do this, and I got to do this, and I got to like be so, anti this, and it's so
but
aggressive
I think that's a false
that it
caricature.
doesn't.
I think that's
but
what
it is what Tim Pool is, and Tim Pool is the last person I think the majority of women I know want to be with. So if you want to look for masculinity, look at the men who actually have a decent relationship with women. Sometimes it's toxic, but you got to get into their psyches and figure out what moves them. Women move men. There's a reason why Roger Ailes had all those gorgeous women on air. He knew what got into a man's mind, and it worked. And that's what great ad making is. I think Tim Pool is speaking to men online, but that is not swaying men into supporting one way or another. He's speaking to a group of men online in an echo chamber. And frankly, he's very demasculine. There's nothing masculine about Tim Pool and his little beanie.
I think that's very mean and hard. I mean, I've met him. I've been on his show before. You can disagree with. He's not trying to set himself up as the archetype of manliness, nor am I, nor it's the Kamala Harris people here are trying to say this is what a man is, and thus it's okay to vote for Kamala Harris. But what I'm saying is that that's a caricature and a stereotype anyway, because people run the gamut on like the spectrum of manliness, and manliness is more complicated than that. Like the 50s kind of stereotype of what like rugged whatever is again, that's just a stereotype. So I don't know why we're like reaffirming that and then saying that's okay. That's what's weird to me about this. Aren't we trying to? I actually thought the Progressive Project was to, and part of this I agree with because I'm an individualist. I want everyone is different and unique and has different characteristics and does not fit neatly into some box. But you're trying to what the people who thought this ad was a good idea was doing is trying to put everyone in a box and say, and then that box is good with Kamala Harris. And I just find that suspect. Like, we wouldn't do that for any other group. Like, what if it was an ad? I'm sure you would criticize it. Democrats would criticize if it was an ad for, let's say, black men relying on stereotypes about, like, I don't know, foods or cultures or something that black people like and saying, I like these things and it's okay to vote for Donald Trump. Progressives would obviously make fun of that deservedly. Or for any other group. Like, relying on broad caricature is not good, is not okay, is not something we should do.
But it wasn't necessarily broad. If you really listen to the ad.
It was pretty broad.
Oh, well, I mean, braiding your daughter's hair, watching musicals. They had mentioned West Side Story. I mean, there was a little bit more context there if you really listen to it. Again, was this the ad that I would have done and frankly Kamala Harris would have done? Probably not. It was done by a comedian. That is also a sign of movement because, I was on Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2016 and there were so many ads, especially in 2016, that popped up that were not official campaign ads, but they spoke to different folks. They got attention. We're talking about it right now. And we watched the ad, and even if it sways a few, 1%, 0.5%, 0.2% of voters, you're now talking about how men really need to step up and support Kamala Harris. An ad I would like, and maybe this is also why Kamala Harris, is really leaning on the Dick Cheneys and the Gonzaleses and the Liz Cheneys of the world, is because it's about motivating those folks who don't feel like they have permission to support Kamala Harris.
But they do feel like they have permission. They just don't support her because they don't like her policies.
I don't think it's about policies.
No, they're not voting for her because she's not a woman.
Welcome to politics. It's never about policies. People say it's about immigration. They say it's about economy. It's about how they're feeling. And if someone doesn't feel comfortable, but that's not how politics works. If someone doesn't feel comfortable voting for someone,
this is setting up an excuse for when she loses. It's going to be the same thing as Hillary's going to be like, oh, she lost because she's a woman and men were not allowed to vote for her.
Misogyny exists, Robbie. Misogyny exists. Ask any woman in the world. And I think that there are going to be women that show up on election day that may have said they were supporting for Donald Trump, but they go into that voting booth and they support Kamala Harris because they don't feel like it's socially acceptable to not do so. And I think that there should be men who feel like it is okay to support Kamala Harris because of XYZ reasoning.
If Kamala Harris loses, it's not going to be because of sexism, just like it wasn't when Hillary lost.
Well, that's what
it's going to be of not trusting the political figure because she hasn't been clear about what her policies are. She never does any interviews, and she's
been doing interviews every single day. Every single day, Robbie. That's not true.
It's going to be because of her insincerity.
Her insincerity. And Donald Trump is so sincere. And Donald Trump, who also hasn't been showing up and doing interviews, doesn't want to do a debate, doesn't want to do town halls. I mean, he is speaking...
It has nothing to do with Donald Trump. It's about Kamala Harris.
No, it does, actually, because the voters she's trying to sway are voters that don't support Donald Trump and used to, and are Republicans. And so now she needs to get them to win over. Well, we'll see. Maybe that's not her strategy, that ad, but it is her supporter strategy, who's a comedian.
I mean, I don't even think some of that stuff, like, who's trying to ban Little Women? Is that on the...
They're banning books, yeah.
Well, not Little Women. No, they're banning hardcore pornographic books, not banning them, just saying that they shouldn't be on the library shelves of the public K-12 educational environments in some states. Some state officials are saying that we don't need hardcore pornography under those circumstances. They're not trying to ban Little Women. It's a fine book. I liked the movie. It's not... Ron DeSantis isn't going to pry your copy of Little Women from your cold dead hand. It's not happening.
He doesn't do... His books are not pornographic by any means. They're philosophical. They're political. He's intellectual. It's about race.
We're not going to ban those either. It's not happening. It's books with hardcore pornographic images on them that some parents didn't want on the shelves of their public schools. I think that's a little bit different than banning Little Women. But we will leave it there for today. Lots of fun on our show, even though we were not, through the magic of television, we're not in the same room right now. I don't know how long this is going to go on. I hope it doesn't go on for much longer. But it's always a pleasure to make TV with you, Namiki. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And we will be back in some form later this week. Bye-bye.